Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly perilous, high-stakes world of early modern diplomacy. We're talking about an era where waiting for a single letter could literally cost a king his entire empire. We're going to unpack the pre-telegraphic era, the absolutely fascinating life-or-death reality of just getting a message from point A to point B before any of our modern tech existed. Think about this for a second. Imagine the absolute panic of waiting 3 whole months for a text message. And, not just any text, but one that held the fate of a literal war and the lives of thousands of soldiers. I mean, we get anxious today if a message doesn't deliver in 3 seconds, right? But back in the early modern period, rulers and diplomats operated in this agonizing information vacuum. They were completely in the dark about shifting alliances, sudden battles, or, wow, even the death of a monarch. This was actually the devastating reality for the English Secretary of State, Sir George Calvert, back in 1624. So he sends these highly urgent instructions to the English ambassador over at Constantinople, Sir Thomas Roe, basically telling him to get their Protestant ally to threaten the emperor. Well, that vital letter took a quarter of a year to arrive, 3 full months. By the time Roe finally read it, their ally had already signed a peace treaty with the exact enemy they were supposed to threaten. Calvert complained bitterly, pointing out that it takes way more effort to restart a war machine than to just keep it running. So yeah, poor communication came with a massive diplomatic price tag.
All right, let's jump into part one, the ordinary post and building that first network.
So, to avoid total strategic disasters like the one we just talked about, empires built what was called the ordinary post. Think of this as a centralized baseline network of staging posts, originally pioneered by rulers like France's Louis XI, and then massively expanded by the famous Taxis family across the Holy Roman Empire. This was the absolute backbone of international communication. Running this massive operation were riders known as post boys, even though, to be clear, they were definitely fully grown men. And that horn you always see them with, it wasn't just for show. They had to blast that thing to clear oncoming traffic off the roads, to literally fight off their own exhaustion so they wouldn't fall asleep in the saddle, and most importantly, to signal the next in to get fresh horses ready for a rapid, seamless handover. And let me tell you, this system ran on strict, absolutely unforgiving schedules. Queen Elizabeth I's Privy Council was totally obsessed with speed. They officially mandated exact paces for these riders, 7 miles an hour in the summer and a sluggish 5 miles an hour in the treacherous winter mud. And to make sure these postboys didn't dawdle, well, authorities would occasionally stamp the horrifying outline of a literal gallows on their dockets, a brutal, in-your-face reminder that extreme delays could actually get you hanged. Speed and reliability were the ultimate watchwords here. Now, when it came to crossing borders for international delivery, the route shifted seamlessly from horseback to the sea. Governments relied heavily on these slim, really fast vessels called packet boats to navigate treacherous waters like the English Channel, the North Sea, and the Mediterranean. Routes from Dover to Calais or Harwich to the Netherlands, these were the vital arteries of European diplomacy. And these ships, they relied entirely on speed rather than heavy armaments to stay safe, though they did pack a few small guns just to defend themselves if wartime got too hot. Which brings us to part two, plagues, pirates, and spies, the gauntlet of threats. Because, you see, the journey wasn't just agonizingly slow. It was an absolute gauntlet of deadly physical and political threats. Getting a letter across the continent meant navigating this crazy maze of human paranoia, natural disasters, and straight-up international espionage. A diplomatic dispatch had to survive border quarantines at stations where mail was physically pierced with forks and literally perfumed over smoke, just in case the paper carried disease. Then you had these specialized spies in post offices working in so-called black chambers, whose entire job was to secretly open, read, and reseal the mail. Oh, and if a packet boat was cornered by an enemy warship, couriers were strictly instructed to tie their sensitive letter bags to heavy iron weights and just chuck them right into the ocean to sink their secrets. Honestly, just doing the job was inherently lethal, largely driven by extreme paranoia. Take this horrifying true story from 1575. A Milanese post-rider arrives in Florence. He's simply suspected of carrying the plague, which, actually, scratch that, it turned out he wasn't even infected. But the Grand Duke wasn't taking any chances. He ordered the rider shot dead on sight. The flow of information was vital for sure, but the terrifying fear of a pandemic trumped even the Royal Mail. Moving on to part three. The elite royal couriers. So to fight back against intercepted ships, totally unreliable postboys, and, well, murdered riders, monarchs started investing heavily in highly capable professionals who owed their loyalty strictly to the crown.
Proudly wearing the silver Greyhound badge, these elite agents were very well paid, heavily armed, and trusted with massive responsibilities. They didn't just carry letters. They transported huge sums of hard cash to pay foreign agents, carried secret ciphers, and were often trusted with incredibly sensitive, unwritten oral instructions that were just too dangerous to ever commit to paper. These king's messengers were effectively the secret agents of their era. A really fantastic example is this young guy named Richard Tremaine working at the English embassy in Paris back in 1559. He wasn't just some glorified mailman. He was tasked with a deeply covert operation, expertly smuggling a high-value hostage, the Earl of Arran, right out of the grasp of the French. Tremaine disguised the Earl as a merchant and snuck him safely back to England. I mean, these careers were basically the special forces of early modern diplomacy.
But diplomats still had to make strategic choices. Royal couriers were amazing, sure, but they were also super conspicuous and incredibly expensive. So resourceful ambassadors would often just discreetly hide their critical messages within ordinary merchant trade networks. The merchant's post was cheap, it was covert, and it was surprisingly reliable. And even wilder, ambassadors would actually temporarily share careers with rival nations. Over in Spain, the British ambassador routinely shared careers with the Portuguese, the Dutch, and even the French. It just goes to show that the mutual need for reliable communication sometimes completely overrode national rivalries.
Let's get into part 4, diplomatic workarounds, or what I like to call the survival playbook. Surviving this incredibly stressful era of perpetually delayed or missing information forced foreign diplomats to completely shift how they approached statesmanship. You simply couldn't micromanage foreign policy from the capital, so they developed a strict survival playbook. Step 1. Deploy multiple copies of the exact same letter across different trade routes, basically just crossing your fingers that at least one survives the gauntlet. Step 2. Carefully cipher only the most sensitive text. In fact, the British ambassador at Constantinople actually used the open, unciphered parts of his letters to intentionally plant misinformation for spies to read. And step 3, grant ambassadors extreme, almost absolute negotiating power. Because, when instructions take months to arrive, the person on the ground has to be totally trusted to make history-altering decisions on the fly. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really fascinating historical paradox. The Florentines actively realized that these massive communication delays created what they called an advantage of time. When a crisis erupted, the sheer inability to react immediately allowed fiery tempers to naturally cool down before armies could even be mobilized. It forces us to ask a rather provocative question today. In our modern era of instant texts, split-second tweets, and immediate global communication, have we actually made modern diplomacy far more dangerous by eliminating that advantage of time? It's definitely something to think about the next time you're frantically waiting for a response to a message. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the wild history of early modern communications.